Hello everyone, and welcome to our final drag and drop tutorial for our view-based NSTableView series. Hopefully you've enjoyed this sort of four-part series so far, and this is the final one to explain how we can reorder items within the table view. So at this point we've done everything from dragging into the table view, dragging out of the table view, inserting new things by dragging stuff into the table view. The last part is, of course, to reorder items. So just to demo this, if this is my final working application, so what we have set up is, so if we drag these two items here, you'll notice that they drag as normally, and if I go to drag them within the range that I have selected here, there's no option to actually let go of the object in there. So the first thing I'm doing with this final version is I'm essentially finding a range that I can't drop these objects within. So anywhere from the first object to the last object, I don't allow a drop. And this is just because, for example, if I had something like this set up and I went to drop this here, this doesn't really make logical sense either to the user, and it's also more difficult to program. But that's kind of the reason that we're doing this. So I'm blocking off the range from the start to the end. Once I go outside this range, you'll notice we now have the indicator that we can drop these, and you'll notice that the table view will animate both of those to that new position. Alright, so that's that, and now all we have to do is start programming this stuff. The other case that we have is when we hold down the Option key, you'll also notice that we have the option to copy these. So if we hold down the Option key, we can copy those in, and there you go. You can see that they're copied. Alright, so let's go ahead and try this out. So basically the two things that we have to start out are new variables. We want to have an NS range. We're going to call this object range. And the NS range is just a C struct that represents a start point and then the length. So it's a range of, basically an index range. Then the other thing we want to have is an NS array, and this is going to be the currently dragged objects. Alright, and this is just an array representing the objects that we're currently dragging around on our array. Okay, so now what do we have to do? Well, there's two methods that I'm going to want to add to our table view section here. And these both come from the NSTableView data source protocol. So if we take a little gander at the documentation here, you'll see that there's two methods. One called dragging session will begin at point for row indexes. This happens when we begin a dragging session. So as soon as I start dragging from the table view, that's going to start. The other one is dragging session ended at point, and that's when we have ended the drag. So when I let go of the mouse, essentially, that is when the dragging session will end. So those two methods we're going to use to basically initialize the objects that we're dragging around. So for our first one, we're going to do dragging session will begin at point for row indexes. And this one is kind of simple. Basically, all we want to do is figure out the range that we want to allow. So we'll create an NS range, and we'll call it range, or sorry, we don't want to create an NS range. We want to use the object range that we had for our instance variable, and we'll say NS make range. The location is where we're starting out, and we get this handy dandy NS index set, which is just a set or a list of all the indexes that we have selected. And so there's a convenient method on the NS index set class, and that's just first index. Alright, so the next part here is to figure out the length of this, and we can just do a little computation. So NSU integer, and that's just an unsigned int. All we want to do for this is we'll get the length and we will calculate the length that we have. So we'll take the end of the NS index set, so we'll say row indexes last index. We'll add 1 to that just to demo why we do that. If this is index 1, which it is, then I don't actually want to be able to drag to index 2, so I actually want to start dragging at index 3, right? That's where I want to start. So that's why we're adding 1. I don't want to allow a drag into the spot 2. I actually want to start on spot 3. So for that reason, we add +1, and then we just subtract the initial position, so we can take the first index. All right, and that gets us the length of, from the beginning index to the end, right? Final minus initial, that gets you the length of those indexes, and I can just put in len there. The next part is to actually get the objects that we're dragging around, so we'll use our currently dragged objects, and we will ask the table contents for the objects at these indexes. So we say objects at indexes, takes an NS index set, and we have one, so we'll just ask it for all the things that we have selected. And so now we have an array of all the things that are selected, which is useful because we need to, keep track of those guys that we're moving around. All right, the next one is the ending part. So we'll go ahead and implement that. And all we're doing here is basically just nilling out or zeroing out the objects that we already have. So I'm just going to make a range of 0, 0, and for the currently dragged objects, I'm just going to nil that out. All right, and the reason I'm doing this is so that if I'm dragging from somewhere else, right, or let's say I drag around in the table view, and then I go to do a drag from somewhere else, I don't want to have these with actual values in them, so I'm going to, make sure that they don't exist anymore, because I'm not actually dragging stuff from the table view anymore, so I shouldn't have any currently dragged objects from the table view. Alright, so that's good. The next part is invalidate drop, and you'll have to bear with me because on this tutorial I'm just kind of winging my coding, so I don't have any extra notes on the side, so I'm kind of thinking through the code as we go along, which I don't always do, but sometimes I do. Anyway, so for this part here, we're simply checking to see, right, that we're in the table view. So if the dragging source is from the table view, then we want to, we're actually reordering stuff, or we're copying the same object from the table view. In either case, we want to basically check to see what the dragging source is, what kind of operation we have. So we can say info dragging source operation mask. And if we have an NS drag operation copy, that means that we're holding down the option key, and that signifies that we're copying things, right? So if I drag things around in the table view and I hold down the option key, that forces a copy to happen, and that's what that little plus sign shows up, right? If I go to move this object and I hold down the option key, that little plus sign appears and I can copy objects now. So if our source operation mask is a copy, then we actually want to insert stuff, and so we are just going to do the same thing that we did basically down here. So I'll just copy and paste that, and I actually want the same thing, right? We're doing a copy, so that's what we're going to do. If we're not doing that, then that means we're actually implementing a move. So in this case, I am just going to say NSDrag operation move, and there we go. So that's all I want to do. You'll notice I didn't set the animates to destination to be yes, because I don't actually want it to animate from the thing I'm dragging to the new spot in the table view. I didn't want to run that. If I go to my final app, you'll notice if I drag something right and I let go of it, it doesn't animate from where I dragged it. It actually animates in the table view, which is what I want. Alright, so that's validate drop. The other thing that we have to do in validate drop, which is why we created this object range, is we actually have to check to see that we're outside of the object range. So we can do that by adding an if statement in here. So if we're, we have this condition here, but then we also want to check that we're outside of the object range. So we can just say object range dot location. If the current row that we're at is greater than this, then we're good. Actually, sorry, I said that opposite. If the row that we're going to drop this on is less than, then we're good, right? So we want to be outside of the object range. So I want the row to be somewhere outside of the range, and if it's less than this location, that's good. And if it's also greater than the end location, right? So to get the end location, I can say object range. I'm just going to collapse this left side here. I can say object range location plus object range length. And if that is less than the current row, right, then we're good, because that means the row is beyond the range or it's before the original range, right? That's what we wanted to check for, and that's why we throw that in there. All right, so now we actually go to implement the drop. So we have to implement accept drop, and this is where we figure out what we're going to do for this. So accepting drop, there's either two things, right? We're either performing an insert or we're performing a move. So let's figure out the condition though for inserting something. So if we're inserting something, that means that we either are coming from somewhere outside of the table view, or we're also going to be copying. So those are the two cases, right? We either are dragging stuff from outside the table view and then we're copying them in, or we are manually, or we're forcing a copy from the items that we're already dragging in our table view. So the first thing we'll check is to see that we have no currently dragged objects. If that's true, that means that we're not dragging from the table view, right? That we're coming from somewhere else outside of the table view, and that's a way that we can check that. The other thing is to check to see if we're forcing a copy. So we can check that info for the dragging source operation mask, and operation copy. So if we're forcing a copy, then that's also another case that we want to perform an insert, like so. Alright, so that is, the cases for that, and the case for moving is basically everything else. So else, we're going to do basically the same thing for the perform insert. We're going to have to write a new method here, but it's going to be set up very similarly. So I'll just copy and paste this code here. We're going to be making a new method, and we'll call it perform drag reorder with drag info row. So it's going to have basically the same parameters, but it's going to look like that. The other thing that we're going to add in here is two calls, which I'll explain, but I'll just write them out for now. So TableView begin updates, and then after this call to perform the drag order, we're going to do TableView end updates. Alright, so both of those calls essentially sets up the table view to be animated. So if we're going to animate multiple things, right, if we're dragging a bunch of things and we reorder, a whole list of things that we're dragging, we want all of those animations to happen essentially at the same time. And we can tell the table view to do that by wrapping our moves that we're going to tell the table view to do in begin updates and end updates. So begin updates says, table view, yo, we're going to start up here and we have to make sure that we don't animate yet, but we're going to animate soon. So pay attention to things that you're going to animate, and then when I tell you that the updates are over, then you can animate everything. So that's what end updates will do. It'll animate all those things that we told it to animate in a bit. So you'll see. All right, let's go ahead and implement this method so it stops yelling at us. I'll just go ahead and copy and paste this to make my life easy. All right, the method name is perform drag reorder with drag info and row. All right, so that's that. Now, this one works pretty much the same way to start anyway as the perform insert one, right? So we get a list of classes that we're going to use. Then we got to go through that info object and enumerate. So it's pretty much the same thing as we've done a gajillion times already. We don't care about the options. The thing for the view is the table view. Classes is classes. Search options nil. And then we're going to use this block. Alright, so now, of course, we have to be smart and figure out what we're going to do in the code. And not having notes for this section is going to be painful, but we'll figure it out. Alright, so to begin, right, we have this list of objects that we're going through, and we have to figure out essentially the new place that we want to drop these items. So to do that, we can say NSInteger, and this is going to be the new index. And the new index we can calculate by taking the row that we're going to drop on, right, plus the index of the element. So if I am carrying 3 different things around, right, the index of one of them is going to be at row, let's say 3. The next one's going to be at the next index, so row 4, row 5, etc. So that's why we add the little index parameter. That's just for all the objects that we're dragging, each index, you get the idea. So that's that. The next part is to figure out the object that we're actually going to be dragging. So we can make a new desktop entity, or not actually a new one, but we're going to take the desktop entity from the location that we're dragging. So of course we're holding on to all of these currently dragged objects, and we can ask for the index there, and that'll get us that object that we're talking about right now. Then we've got to look at the table view, or the what am I trying to say, the table contents, and then we want to get the old position of where this guy was located. All right, so we can say ns integer old index, and we can ask the table view, or table contents rather, for the index of this object. So there we go, we have this old index, right? This just represents the old location that we had the table, or the old location that we had this thing located in our table contents, and we are going to have to remove that guy later on. So let's go ahead and do that. We take the table contents, right? We say remove object at index, and we're going to remove the guy at the old index. Good thing that we're still holding on to it though, right? Because we want to reinsert that at a new spot. So now we'll tell the table contents insert object entity at new index. And then finally we have to actually tell the table view that we made this move. So this is where we tell the table view to actually, this is the animation you should make. So we moved a row from the index at the old index, and then we went to a new index like that. Alright, so I think that's everything. We'll find out when I go to run. There's actually one more thing that I'll come back to, but I think that's the gist of everything that I need here. So as you'll notice, we have our nice table view, and if I select, let's say 3 things here, I drag them to this spot, you can see that they do nicely animate to that new position. So we done good. There we go. So everything works as intended. Now, you'll notice, however, that this will break if we go the other way. So you'll notice that I've been carrying objects sneakily from the bottom, and I bring them up to the top. However, if I take something from the top and I scooch it under here, you'll notice that they do this kind of ugly thing, and then they split out across, there's these gaps in between, not what I wanted to happen. So what's going on here? Well, let's just take a very simple example. If I take the top object, let's say this is Australia, right? And we're saying that we can accept the drop to go here, right? If I let go, okay, he didn't actually go below Belgium, he now went below Argentina. So why did that happen? Well, because we're removing this object from the actual array, right? So if I go to take this guy and I move him and then I drop him here, then we remove the guy from the table contents, but then we still kept the same index. So I said, if I was to run through thinking of the code, we're trying to insert here, which is at index, what is that, 0, 1, 2, 3. So we're trying to insert it in index 3. However, we're not accounting for the fact that we're removing the object, right? So I remove this guy from the top, so the table contents now is 1 spot less, and so we're telling it to insert at index 3, but we've removed the Argentina object, and so it will still get inserted at index 3. However, there was, something else had to fill its place, and so we aren't accounting for that because we're taking from the top of the array, or the beginning of the array. So to battle that, we just have to kind of make a condition here. So if the old index is less than the new index, which means we're dragging from the top and moving down to the bottom, then we have to do a little bit of math. So new index minus equals, and what we want to do is we'll say index plus 1. Alright, and we'll go ahead and run this. And let's see that that works. So if I take Argentina, it should be now below, let's say, Australia in this example. And yes, it is now below Australia. If I take these three guys here, there we go. They all went below Cameroon. And yeah, so that's what we wanted, right? The correct behavior is happening now. And why does that work? Well, like I said, we're checking to make sure the new index is somewhere further than where we're dragging. So the new index is further down than the old index. If that's the case, we want to subtract the at least one from it, right? We want to subtract one, and for each object we need to subtract one more time, right? So for the first object we want to subtract one. However, if we're dragging two objects around, then we have to subtract for both of those guys, and so we need to use that index parameter to actually keep track of that. So the first guy, right, if I moved Australia and Argentina, Australia only needs to be moved down by one, but then by the time Argentina goes, it also needs to be moved an additional one than it thought previously, right? Because Australia and Argentina are now gone. So there we go. That's everything that we have to do for that, and I think that covers everything for our view-based NSTableViews drag and drop. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this little series that we had on cool table view stuff. If you have any questions, feel free to leave your questions in the comments below, and I'll see you in an upcoming tutorial for something else in Cocoa. Alright, see you then.